Okay, so for today, we're going to discuss about the PHP basics, no? So it covers, of course, the PHP introduction, the PHP install, no? The variables, data types, and logical operators. Okay, so I will share to you a video presentations na available in the YouTube, no? And you will be able to perform actually, no, later in our laboratory classes, no?
How's it going, guys? Welcome back to our first episode on how to code PHP. Now, before we get into the actual coding part, I really quickly want to talk about what exactly PHP is and what you can use it for inside a website. So right now, since you guys are already here and you're ready to learn about PHP, I want to mention that it's really important that you already know HTML and CSS. If you don't know HTML and CSS, it's going to be a little bit difficult for you to follow along on some of these lessons. So if you don't know it, go ahead and go back, learn about it first, and then return to our PHP lessons here. Now, having said this, a lot of people are also going to tell you that you need to know JavaScript before learning PHP. Now, while it's true that learning JavaScript makes it easier to understand PHP in the beginning, it also goes the other way around. If you learn PHP first and then learn JavaScript, it also becomes easier to understand JavaScript. So you don't need to know JavaScript before getting into PHP. The minimum requirement is that you know HTML and CSS. So now that we talked about what you need to know before getting into PHP, let's actually talk about what PHP actually is. As you guys can see it actually right on my screen here, the PHP stands for Hypertext Preprocessor, and essentially what PHP is what we call a backend programming language, or what you might call a server-side programming language. So what you can do with PHP is you can make your website more dynamic. Right now, if you were to only know HTML and CSS, you could create a website where you can go in and click on a couple of links and read about stuff, maybe put a video in there or some images. But what if you want to make it more dynamic and make users able to do something on your website? Let's say I want to, for example, have a login system where people can go and sign up, a user account. And with that user account, when they do log in, they can go to a forum, which you might also have on your website, and post something. Now, in order to have this, you're going to need to have a database. And a database is used for posting, or at least storing, all these posts and users that might be signing up on your website. So if you don't have a database, you can't save any information on your website. Now, in order to connect the website to the database, you're going to need a server-side language. And there's a lot of them out there, and the one we're going to be focusing on is the one called PHP. Now, PHP is the same thing WordPress is written in. It's also the same thing that Facebook uses, and it's an awesome tool when you get started on, learning server-side languages. So it's not one of the difficult ones. Now, what you can do with PHP, like I said, is you can make your website more dynamic. You can also insert stuff into databases. You can get stuff from databases. You can, create cookies. You can create sessions, which you use when you do actually log in on a website. You can do a bunch of awesome stuff, and it doesn't always have to be something related to a database. You can also do stuff on your website not connected to a database, but you need to have at least server access when you do something with PHP, which we'll talk about in the next couple of lessons, because we do actually need to set up a local server on our computer before we can use PHP, and it's really easy to do. It's not it's not difficult at all. So in the next couple of lessons, we'll talk about how to actually set up the local database. I just want to mention that PHP can, for some people in the beginning, be a little bit difficult to learn. And the reason it might be a little bit difficult, and the same thing goes for JavaScript. JavaScript and PHP are very different. The concept behind them are very different from HTML and CSS. That's because you need to think about coding in a little bit different way than you would with HTML and CSS. So don't get stressed or frustrated if you don't quite get PHP in the beginning, because everyone who starts learning PHP will in the beginning feel like they're learning a bunch of stuff which doesn't really make sense in the beginning. But later on, I promise, it's going to make a lot of sense. And just keep following the lessons and you will understand PHP in no time. So now that we talked a bit about PHP, what it can actually do and that sort of thing, I just really quickly want to mention the actual process of creating a PHP document. When you have a PHP document, if I were to actually go ahead and save this empty file I have here as something.php, we can actually go ahead and write both HTML code, JavaScript code, jQuery, XML. We can do a bunch of different code inside our PHP file, which is actually why a lot of times later on when programmers, after they learn PHP, you don't really see them creating HTML files anymore. They're always going to be creating PHP files and just writing the HTML inside the PHP files. So I just want to put it out there. You shouldn't get frustrated if you don't quite understand in the beginning. Everyone has it like that in the beginning. So as we do it later on and we move further in these lessons, you will learn PHP and become familiar with it. And it's going to come as a second nature if you do actually practice it. So I hope you guys will enjoy these lessons. I don't really have anything else to talk about when it comes to introducing PHP. I think I did actually cover most of it. So like I said, in the next couple of episodes, you will actually learn how to set up So back to our first episode on how to code PHP. Now, before we get into the actual coding part, I really quickly want to talk about what exactly PHP is and what you can use it for inside a website. So right now, since you guys are already here and you're ready to learn about PHP, I want to mention that it's really important that you already know HTML and CSS. If you don't know HTML and CSS, it's going to be a little bit difficult for you to follow along on some of these lessons. So if you don't know it, go ahead and go back, learn about it first, and then return to our PHP lessons here. Now, having said this, a lot of people are also going to tell you that you need to know JavaScript before learning PHP. Now, while it's true that learning JavaScript makes it easier to understand PHP in the beginning, it also goes the other way around. If you learn PHP first and then learn JavaScript, it also becomes easier to understand JavaScript. So you don't need to know JavaScript before getting into PHP. The minimum requirement is that you know HTML and CSS. So now that we talked about what you need to know before getting into PHP, let's actually talk about what PHP actually is. As you guys can see, I did actually write on my screen here. The PHP stands for Hypertext Preprocessor. And essentially what PHP is what we call a backend programming language, or what you might call a server-side programming language. So what you can do with PHP is you can make your website more dynamic. Right now, if you were to only know HTML and CSS, you could create a website where you can go in and click on a couple of links and read about stuff, and maybe put a video in there or some images. But what if you want to make it more dynamic and make users able to do something on your website? Let's say I want to, for example, have a login system where people can go and sign up, a user account. And with that user account, when they do log in, they can go to a forum, which you might also have on your website, and post something. Now, in order to have this, you're going to need to have a database. And a database is used for posting, or at least storing, all these posts and users that might be signing up on your website. So if you don't have a database, you can't save any information on your website. Now, in order to connect the website to the database, you're going to need a server-side language. And there's a lot of them out there, and the one we're going to be focusing on is the one called PHP. Now, PHP is the same thing WordPress is written in. It's also the same thing that Facebook uses, and it's an awesome tool when you get started on, learning server-side languages. So it's not one of the difficult ones. Now, what you can do with PHP, like I said, is you can make your website more dynamic. You can also insert stuff into databases. You can get stuff from databases. You can, create cookies. You can create sessions, which you use when you do actually log in on a website. You can do a bunch of awesome stuff, and it doesn't always have to be something related to a database. You can also do stuff on your website not connected to a database, but you need to have at least server access when you do something with PHP, which we'll talk about in the next couple of lessons, because we do actually need to set up a local server on our computer before we can use PHP, and it's really easy to do. It's not it's not difficult at all. So in the next couple of lessons, we'll talk about how to actually set up the local database. I just want to mention that PHP can, for some people in the beginning, be a little bit difficult to learn. And the reason it might be a little bit difficult, and the same thing goes for JavaScript. JavaScript and PHP are very different. The concept behind them are very different from HTML and CSS. That's because you need to think about coding in a little bit different way than you would with HTML and CSS. So don't get stressed or frustrated if you don't quite get PHP in the beginning, because everyone who started learning PHP will in the beginning feel like they're learning a bunch of stuff which doesn't really make sense in the beginning. But later on, I promise, it's going to make a lot of sense. And just keep following the lessons and you will understand PHP in no time. So now that we talked a bit about PHP, what it can actually do and that sort of thing, I just really quickly want to mention the actual process of creating a PHP document. When you have a PHP document, if I were to actually go ahead and save this empty file I have here as something.php, we can actually go ahead and write both HTML code, JavaScript code, jQuery, XML. We can do a bunch of different code inside our PHP file, which is actually why a lot of times later on when programmers, after they learn PHP, you don't really see them creating HTML files anymore. They're always going to be creating PHP files and just writing the HTML inside the PHP files. So I just want to put it out there. You shouldn't get frustrated if you don't quite understand in the beginning. Everyone has it like that in the beginning. So as we do it later on and we move further in these lessons, you will learn PHP and become familiar with it. And it's going to come as a second nature if you do actually practice it. So I hope you guys will enjoy these lessons. I don't really have anything else to talk about when it comes to introducing PHP. I think I did actually cover most of it. So like I said, in the next couple of episodes, we will actually learn how to set up the local server, and then we'll actually get into PHP. So hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. So in this episode, we're going to talk about installing a local server on your computer. And this is something we need to have when we do want to write PHP code, because like I said in the last episode, PHP is a server-side language, meaning if you don't have a server running, it won't actually work inside the browser. Now, installing a server on your computer is quite easy to do, and it's really quick to do, it's free, and you don't need to worry about it harming your computer in any kind of way. So what we're going to do is, first of all, we need to download a software called XAMPP. Now, there's quite a few programs out there you can use to install a server. I like using the one called XAMPP, and I know a lot of other people do like it, and it's available for both Windows, Linux, and Mac. So for this episode, I'm going to focus on XAMPP. So we're going to open up our browser, we're going to go to Google, and you're going to search for XAMPP. And the first link would probably be the one going to apachefriends.org. So you're going to go ahead and click it, and in here you can see we can download for Windows, Linux, and Mac. So once you download it and install it, do notice where you do install it, because you're going to have to remember that for later. But once you do have it installed, you can actually go to your C drive or D drive, wherever you did actually install it, and find a folder called XAMPP. So once you have XAMPP found, I want you to go into it, and notice we do actually have XAMPP control.exe. If I click it and run it, you can see we get this little window here running. Now, this is what you can use to actually run your server, and you do actually have it installed right now. Once you do install the program called XAMPP, you will have the server installed on your computer. So in order to actually get the server running, we're going to have to activate Apache and MySQL. So I'm going to go ahead and click Start on both of these, and now they should be running. So if we go to our browser again, go to the URL, and you type localhost /PHP myadmin. It should actually take it to your local host, where you can see all the different databases we have installed on our server. So in my case, I do actually have a couple of them, and this is actually a fairly clean new installation of XAMPP, so I don't have a lot of databases right now. But we can actually go ahead and click on databases up here in the top left corner and create a database. So you can actually see we can just write something, create. And I do actually apologize, mine is in Danish. The buttons should be the same places, just in English, of course. But as you can see, I did actually just install a database, or set up a database called SADAD, which was just gibberish I wrote in here. Now, databases we use inside PHP to store data. For example, when you create maybe a login system, in order to have a login system, you also need to have users. And when users sign up, they need to be saved somewhere. So we can actually, go in and check if the username and password matches each other and that sort of thing. So we need to have a database where we can save all kinds of information. And this is actually what we have running right here. Now, in order to just write PHP code, you don't need to do anything inside PHPMyAdmin. All you need to do to get PHP code running or working is to open up XAMPP, the control panel here, and start these two buttons. Once you have these two started, your PHP code is going to work. So we won't actually have to touch PHPMyAdmin before we actually need to use databases, which is not right now. So once we have these running, what you need to do is you need to go back into where you installed XAMPP. And inside the XAMPP folder, you're going to look for the folder called htdocs. You're going to open it up. And in here, you can see I have a couple of folders. And this is actually my folders. I created these. You're most likely going to have some random gibberish in here, like some random files, which XAMPP installs as a default when you do actually install it for the first time. Now, what I want you to do is highlight all the files you have in here and delete them. Once you deleted all of them, I want you to right click and create a new folder. Now this new folder is going to be the root folder for your website, meaning that this is where we're going to save all the files for our website. So I'm going to go ahead and create a folder here called PHP Lessons, which is going to be my folder. You guys can call it whatever you want. So I'm going to go ahead and create PHP Lessons and go in here. So now we can actually start saving all kinds of PHP code. And I do actually want to show you guys a little example of why we need to install a local server. If I were to go and open up a new document, this is a completely clean document. I did not save it or do anything to this one yet. If I start up writing PHP code, which by the way is inside PHP tags like this, we'll talk about that in the next couple of episodes. And if I were to echo out something, which basically means that I want to write something on the screen, I'm going to write echo. I'm going to write hi there, or Hugh there. I'm going to save this one inside the folder we just created. So I'm going to go inside my htdocs folder. Now, just a little tip for you guys. I did actually save my htdocs folder on the side here inside my Explorer tab. It's you're going to be using it quite often if you do a lot of web development. So I recommend you guys save it over here in the side as well. So if I go ahead and save this file I just created inside my PHP lessons root folder, I say index.php because we do have the PHP extension. Save it. You guys will notice when I do actually go into my browser, go up into my URL and type localhost / and then the name of the folder we just created. So in my case, it was PHP lessons. You'll notice that I get some text writing. Now, if I were to actually turn off my control panel and stop these servers and refresh my browser, we'll just wait for it to load. You guys will see we have no web page available. And this is why we need to have a server running, because right now we can't actually get it running. If I were to actually take this document and just run it inside my browser by right-clicking on it and opening with my Google Chrome, I can see it doesn't choose it as a default here. Okay, so I did actually need to go find my Google Chrome for some reason, but I do have it here now. And you guys will actually notice when I do open it inside Google Chrome, just by right-clicking on the file, we get the PHP code right here. So it doesn't actually write out hi-oh there, like just hi-oh there. You can actually see the entire code here. And that's because we don't have a server running. So we do actually need to go start the servers and open it inside our htdocs folder because that's connected to our server. And you guys will see we have the text there. So you need to have a server running every time you do PHP code, meaning that if you have a website that has PHP code in it, you're going to have to use it inside the local host. Now, you might be asking, well, what about when we get it online? Once you do get your website online, I'll show you guys how to get a server or at least a database running on your server, because you will have a server automatically when you upload to an online hosting company. So I'll show you guys how to set up a database at some point inside a hosting company if you want to. So right now you guys can see I did actually write out hi-oh there, and it's working. So that's basically all we needed. I do want to show you guys one last thing, which is if I don't write localhost or don't write anything behind localhost, you guys can see we get to this place here where we can see all the different folders we have inside our htdocs folder. As you guys will see, if I go back into my htdocs, these are the same folders as I have in here. So if you don't want to write anything behind localhost, you can actually just go in here and click PHP lessons, and it opens up again. So this is how we install a local server, and this is all we need to actually get started on PHP. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. So in the last episode, we talked about installing a local server on your computer. And in this episode, we're actually going to start writing some code in PHP. So as you guys can see before we get started, I really quickly want to mention that you should have the Apache MySQL servers running inside XAMPP's control panel. If you don't have this running, you won't actually see the code that we're going to write in this episode. So what we're going to do now, after we have this running, we're going to go to the browser. We're going to type localhost inside our URL and hit enter. Now you guys are probably just going to have one folder from last lesson. I will have a bunch of folders because I do actually have more than one project, but just make sure you open up the folder you created in the last lesson. So I'm going to open up the one I called PHP lessons. Now in here, you guys will notice we do actually get a directory. The reason we get a directory right now is because we don't actually have a starting page for our website. Now, when it comes to starting pages, if we do actually open up our code editor and create a new document, if I were to save this new document as index.html, it would actually recognize it as a starting page. We can also write index.php and will also recognize this as our starting page. So it doesn't really matter if you use index.html or index.php. It will automatically see this one as a starting page no matter the extension. So after we save this as index.php inside our directory, of course, inside our root folder inside htdocs, then we can actually start writing code. Now the thing about PHP documents is even though we have the PHP extension, we can still write HTML and JavaScript code in here. So if I were to open up, just a very basic HTML5 layout, this is just a starting layout for a new website. We have the HTML tags up here. We also have the doc type. So we have the HTML opening and closing tags. We have the body tags. We have the head tags, and just a small title tag in here with some meta tags. So this is a very basic, starting layout for a website inside HTML. Now, in order to write PHP code, we need to use something called PHP opening and closing tags. Now, the way we write those is by saying lesser than, question mark, PHP, which by the way is the opening tag. If you want to close it again, you write question mark, greater than. So everything that goes in between these tags are going to be PHP code. I should mention that you have to write these PHP tags if you want to write PHP code. Otherwise, it's not going to recognize it as PHP code. So in between these tags, we can actually start writing something. And the first thing I want to teach you guys is how to print something on the screen. Now in the last episode, I did actually show you guys an example of how to print something. I didn't really explain it very well, but I just kind of showed you guys. So we can actually write echo inside our PHP tags, which is essentially that we echo something out on the screen. We actually write something on the screen. So I'm going to say echo space, quotation marks, and then we need to make sure we actually end the line of code by writing semicolon at the end. Kind of the same way as we do in CSS when we do want to end off a piece of code. So in between the quotation marks, we can actually write something. So this time I'll say hi there. And do notice I did actually spell hi correctly this time. And if we were to save this and refresh it inside our browser, you guys will notice that when I refresh, it does actually see, oh, you got a index document. And it's just automatically going to take me to it, as you guys can see right here. So right now we have a piece of text that says hi there. Now, if I want to write something else, we can also use a statement or like a function called print. Now, print does the same thing as echo. There's a couple of differences, but right now there's not really any important differences other than I should point out that echo is faster loaded inside your browser. So if you want to print some text and you want it to be fast, echo is faster, even though it's very, very, little amount of faster it is. So we can actually go down to the print and write quotation marks again. And I can actually write my name. So we'll say hello there or hi there, Daniel. And we need to make sure we end it with a semicolon, of course. If I were to save this, refresh my browser, you guys will notice we have some text going on. Now we don't have a space in between here, and that's because I do actually need to add a space after there, and then we'll actually create the space for me. But these are two ways you can actually print out stuff inside a browser. Now I do want to point out, since we're dealing with text right now, you guys will notice I put, quotation marks around the text. If I were to write numbers, we can actually go ahead and eliminate the quotation marks and simply write out some kind of number. We can write 12, for example. If I save this, it will actually print out 12. So you don't have to put it in quotation marks if you're dealing with numbers. You can. If I were to put these in quotation marks, it still will print it out as 12. But this time it's going to see it as a string, which is what we call it when we put, a line of text inside an echo, for example. So right now this 12 is not seen as an integer, it's seen as a string, which is, text. So this is two basic examples of printing out stuff. And we can actually also write equations inside these echoes. So even though we did just talk about printing out stuff, I also want to show you guys that we can actually calculate using PHP. So if I go into my echo and say 12, well, let's say something simple, 10 plus 5. And I save it, refresh my browser. You guys will notice it says 15 because 10 plus 5 is 15. So we can also do very basic math statements, which is gonna become useful later on if you want to do, functions, or if you want to make statements, or if you want to, just do something a little bit more complicated. We will have to do a little bit of math later on because PHP is a technical, programming language. So we will probably be doing some math later on. Now, these are some of the basic ways we can actually print out stuff, and that's what I'm going to focus on in this episode. In the next episode, we're going to talk about something called variables. And variables is something we're going to use quite often in PHP. You're going to use it a lot in PHP. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you guys next time. So in the last episode, we talked about how to write something on the screen inside the browser. And in this episode, we're going to talk about what a variable is. Now, a variable is something you're going to use quite a lot in PHP. Essentially what it is when we take a name and set it equal to something. So to kind of give you guys an example of a variable, let's actually go ahead and write one out. So we're going to write $, which means that now we're creating a variable, and then we need to give it a name. Now, in my case here, I'm just going to call it name as a name. And as you guys can see, it did actually turn green because it's recognized as a variable inside my code editor. Now we have a variable called name, and we need to set it equal to something, meaning that right now I'm going to set it equal to a string called Daniel. And just to refresh it for you guys, remember every time we put something inside quotation marks, it's a string inside PHP. So right now we have a string called Daniel, which is set equal to name. If I were to save this, refresh my browser, you guys will notice that nothing happens. And that's because right now we just simply said that this is equal to this. We didn't actually tell it to write something on the screen. So if I go down to the next line and say echo variable name, and then refresh my browser again, now you guys will notice that it did actually write out Daniel. So what we can do here is we can actually go ahead and just give, a variable any kind of, maybe a calculation or a string of text like we did here, or even, functions. We can create all kinds of things and set it equal to a name, and then reference to it later on when we want to use it for something. Now, why would we want to use this though? Well, let's say, and I'm just giving you guys a small example here, but let's say I have a line of text called Daniel is a handsome fellow. Now, if I were to write this out on the screen, like so, but I'm kind of thinking to myself, but what if we have a text input inside our website where people can write something in it and decide for themselves who is a handsome fellow? So I want them to be able to change the variable depending on what they write in an input. So what we can do is we can simply delete Daniel. And because this is seen as a string, we do need to separate it from PHP code, meaning that if I were to echo out variable name, because variable name is PHP code and this is a string, we need to put in a separator, meaning that we need to write dot or punctuation in between the PHP code and when the string starts. I'm going to save this, and now you guys will notice that it prints out Daniel is a handsome fellow because name is equal to Daniel. If I were to remove the punctuation mark, you guys will actually see that we get an error message. So we do need to make sure we put this in here when we do combine PHP code with strings. Now this was basically what I wanted to show you guys when it comes to variables. But since I mentioned it so many times, I think I should show you guys how to write an input, create an input and echo out the sentence here depending on what name you write inside the input on the website. It's just a nice thing to know. So you don't have to follow along here. You can skip the next episode if you don't want to learn this. I'm just going to show you guys how to do it. So let's say I have inside my body tag, outside the PHP tags, a form, which we did actually learn about in our HTML and CSS lesson. So if you don't know about forms yet, I do recommend you guys go back and learn about it. So inside the form tags, I'm going to just create an input and actually have it inside my form tags. There we go. Now this input is going to have a name equal to, and this name is going to be name, or I could actually say person, just so we don't have name written everywhere. And I'm going to go ahead and set the type for this input as text, because it is text essentially. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to go ahead and save this, and inside my form I have to set a method and an action. Well, we do actually not have to set an action, but we definitely need to set a method. So actions are usually used when you do want to pass this information to another document, but since we're going to stay on the same page, we're just going to use method. So we're going to use a method called get, which means that now once I do write something in the input and hit a button called submit, it's going to take this text that I wrote and pass it into the URL. And again, we're going to learn about that in a future episode, but just so you guys can see an example now, let's go ahead and save this and refresh the browser. So right now you guys can actually see that it says, I can write something and submit it. If I submit it, you're going to notice that in the URL it says $person is equal to blah 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 blah, what I just wrote. So what we can do here is we can actually go down to the variable and set $name equal to whatever we write up inside the input field. So right now I can actually set it equal to $_get, and then I'm going to create the brackets. And inside the brackets, I'm going to write single quote, and then I'm going to write the name that we gave the input as a name. So right now we call it person. I'm going to save it. So right now name is set equal to $_get, which means that it's going to get this thing from the URL and pass it into this, here, which means that name is now equal to what we wrote inside the input. And then we're going to take the sentence down here, which is going to take name and put it into the sentence. So if I refresh, we're probably going to get an error. Okay, we don't, because I did actually have something up here from before. But if I were to go back to the previous page, we do actually get an error, because right now we didn't actually write anything yet. So now this says error message because variable name is not set yet, because we didn't actually write anything, is a handsome fellow. So we do actually need to write something to get rid of this error. And we can actually write something else so it won't show an error and it won't actually show anything until we actually submit it. But for now, let's just go ahead and do it like this. So I'm just going to write Jason again, because Jason is in fact a handsome fellow, and submit it. So now it says Jason is a handsome fellow. So this is just an example of how you can pass variables into something like this and how you can use it on, just a teeny tiny examples. And really, variables are used in so many powerful ways, and this is just a really, really basic example of how you can use it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. This is really all I wanted to show you guys in this episode. So in the next episode, we're going to talk about this a little bit further and do something cooler. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. In this episode, we're going to talk about how to comment inside PHP And this is going to be a really short episode because commenting is really not that difficult. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and take a look at these 2 lines that I wrote here. And let's say I want to comment out 1 line of code. Now, in order to do that, we're going to go ahead and go in front of the code. Then we're going to write \\\. And as you guys can see, we just commented out just 1 line of code. Now, what if I want to comment out more than just 1 line of code? What we can do is we can actually, instead of the \\\, we can write \multiply. And everything that comes after this comment tag is going to get commented out. So everything down here, even the HTML tags, are going to get commented out. Now, in order to stop this again, after the part where we want it to stop, we're going to say multiply \. So just the opposite of the starting comment. And everything that's in between these 2 tags are going to get commented out. So one reason you might want to comment, and again, this is basically just how you comment, but a lot of times when you have PHP code, you're going to see people who write something like, let's say I'm writing a function that does something specific. I can say, this gets something from the database. I can actually leave this comment, and everything that comes after here, I can actually, start writing code. We can do, like a function, or we can do something that does some kind of code in here. So now we know that this function gets something from the database. So you're going to see a lot of commenting inside PHP because PHP can get quite messy. And it's really important that you do actually comment what stuff does when you code PHP. Otherwise, in the future, you won't actually be able to tell what something does. Well, you might be able to tell if you look through the code, but it's just much easier just to have a comment that says what this specific code actually does. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you guys next time. So in this episode, we're going to talk about something called functions in PHP. Now, when we talk about functions, we basically have 2 different types. We have predetermined functions, and we have user-defined functions. Now, in this episode, we're just going to focus on the predetermined functions. The user-defined functions we'll do a little bit later. So when we talk about what a function is, it's essentially a piece of PHP code that does one certain thing. So when we talk about a predetermined function, we talk about a piece of PHP code that has already been defined inside the PHP language, meaning that right now I can actually use it straight away. Now, a user-defined function is a function that I write myself, which I can't use yet because I haven't created it yet. So to give you guys an example of a predetermined function, let's go ahead and write some text here. I'm just going to go ahead and echo a string called Hi Daniel. Now, when we do actually write this out, let's say I want to create a function that goes in and looks at my string to calculate how many characters are inside this string. And it's always going to count the spaces. I just want to mention that. So in order to write a function like that, you have to write the name of the function and then the parentheses, where we're going to put whatever we want to, use the function on inside the parentheses. So we do have a function called string length. And the way we write that is by writing strlen for string length. So it actually goes in and calculates the string length. So right now we did actually create the name for it, and we need to create the parentheses. So we need to put in whatever we want to count the string length of inside the parentheses. So I'm going to take my string and just kind of place it in there. So now if we calculate it, we can actually count ourselves. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 characters, including the space. So if I save this and echo it out, go to my browser, refresh, you guys can see we have 9. So this is one way of using a function called string length, or strlen, which does something. We also have another one which we can actually call string underscore word underscore count. This one will actually count the number of words we have inside the string. Now, again, all the different functions I'm giving you guys examples of right here are just focused on strings. There's functions for all kinds of crazy stuff. And the ones we're just focusing on here, like I said, is strings. So if we go and calculate or like refresh our browser, you guys can see it says 2. Because right now we have 2 words inside the string. Now we also have another one called STRREV, which means string reverse. Now, this one is actually kind of funny, because if we write it out, save it, you can see right now it says, "Hi, Daniel." If you refresh the browser, it's going to take everything backwards, which is just, a fun little thing you can do. We also have another one called string position, which actually goes in and looks at a certain word that we define and tells us where inside the string it's placed. So if we write strpos, and we actually give it two different, parameters inside the parentheses. So right now we do actually have the whole word, or like the whole string. Then afterwards, we're going to say comma, and then we're going to tell it what word we wanted to search for. So right now I could say hi, like so. And once I do actually refresh my browser, it's going to tell me 0. And that's because when we calculate spaces, like the space that is positioned at, we always start at 0. So right now H is 0, I is 1, the space is 2, sorry, I can't count, D is 3, A is 4, and so on and so on. So right now hi starts at position number 0. If I write Daniel, you can actually see that it should be 0, 1, 2, 3 that we see inside the browser, like so. So there's a lot of different awesome functions. And just to do one last one, which I actually like to do, is called string replace. So we say string underscore replace. And now we can actually give it 3 different parameters inside the parentheses. So right now we have hi Daniel, which is the full word. And when we use this one, we actually need to have these, like the word we want to use in the beginning. So I'm actually going to write Daniel in the beginning, comma, and then I'm going to tell it what I want to replace the word Daniel with in the next parameter here. So I want to replace it with Jason. So right now we have hi Daniel. We're going to find the word Daniel and then replace it with Jason. So if I go in and refresh my browser, you guys can see we say hi Jason. It doesn't say hi Daniel anymore. So these are like some examples of functions. There's actually quite a few functions out there that does a lot of different things inside PHP. And we just focused on some string functions here. There's so many functions out there. And if you're familiar with JavaScript, you're also going to recognize that a lot of these actually does the same thing as a lot of the JavaScript functions, except they just called something a little bit different. If you're interested in doing something specific with your text, just go ahead and Google it. That's usually the web programmer way of doing things. If you want a function that needs to do a certain thing, always Google it to see if it already exists out there. And if it doesn't, you can always create it yourself with a user-defined function. Like I said, we're going to learn how to do that a little bit later, not in this episode. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.